Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. And we're back with another episode of Off the Comma. I'm very excited for this week's episode. In keeping with the last handful of episodes, I'm going to be talking to and interviewing someone who's new to my circle. I haven't met Sean before. I'm looking forward to getting to know him through the telling of his story. And I'm also excited because, unbeknownst to me, Sean comes to us from the UK. And anybody who's been listening to the podcast on a regular basis knows that I have some new connections to the UK. And the UK holds a very fond place in my heart. So I'm looking forward to not only hearing Sean's story, but also hearing, any uniquenesses in Sean's story that are framed by where he currently is and where else he's traveled in the world, because I'm very passionate about travel as well. I'm going to stop rambling now, Sean. I'm going to hand it over to you. Sean, tell us, how would you like to be known, and what else would you like for us to know about you?
Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'm Sean. I'm an artist and a writer from the Sussex coast here in England. I don't mind how people want to see me. I don't try to control their perception of me, though it's obvious that you don't want them to think too badly. But I'm a very, very creative person. I acknowledge that in myself because it happens all the time. And I'm enthusiastic, and I'm very into, I suppose, individuality, as the world seems to become more and more co-dependent and cancel-y, for want of a better term. I find the urge to be independent more and more strong. So I guess I'm a creative, independent kind of guy.
Okay, nice. Sean, in addition to that, this creative, independent kind of guy, what else would you like people to know about you in terms of maybe what you do or hobbies or interests?
I graduated from the University of Creative Arts in Surrey here in Farnham in 2003 in painting. There's a painting behind me, which I don't think your listeners are going to see, obviously, being listeners. But I'm a painter. I still paint now. I've really come back to that post-COVID, really enjoying that process. But I'm a musician too. I've got 6 albums out, and a writer. I've got 9 books out. And when people hear those 3, they tend to go, well, you must like one more than the other, and the other 2 are hobbies. What I try to do is to make sure I do all of them with equal intensity, to make sure, because I'm not a hobbyist in either of them. I love all of them equally, and they all have their own power. So I'm quite keen to make sure that people know I'm equally intense about all 3 of those.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's cool. And what I'm noticing is that expression is very important to you, because you have all these different ways of expressing yourself. You've described yourself as being creative, but the expression in and of itself seems like an activity, a way of being for you.
Yeah, that's very perceptive indeed. I'm a stammerer. I've been a stammerer since I was stutterer to Americans, since I was 5 years old, 1980. And I actually wrote a book about that in 2023, the last book before this year, called Compelling Speech, The Stammering Enigma. It got a Kostler Arts Platinum Award I'm very proud of, and some great reviews. It's about stammering and the processes that we go through. Obviously now, it comes and goes, and it has this kind of hesitancies that I have. I've got lots of techniques to control it, but the reality is that promoting work, talking on things like podcasts, and being more vocal about the creative work has just really, really helped. I can't deny it, And we're encouraged to see stammering as not a negative thing in life these days with the new pathology of disability, because it comes and goes. And so, but we are happier when it's not there. I can't deny that, being my age. You've got used to enjoying not having stammers in your speech. So expression is, I think, probably deeply mixed up with all that, and that's what compelling speech was a lot about.
Nice. Well, I say nice. Thank you for sharing that. And I have a feeling I'm going to learn a lot, not only about you, but also some things that maybe I wasn't already aware of or didn't know about. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I'm looking forward to hearing how that shows up in your story. And if there's anything that you need from me to support you in the conduct of this interview and this conversation, then please do. Just say so anywhere along the way. Even if that's an occasional, an insult back at me, or tell me to back off for a minute.
Well, there's a thing that people don't want to be interrupted as stammerers, and there's a big thing about don't interrupt stammerers as like a sensitivity. And the thing is that I'm not like that. I want to be on a level playing field with the speech typical, as I call them, which is everybody else except the 1% of stammerers. And so I don't want special treatment, frankly, and that's a bit unusual in the stammering community, who are all like, "Don't interrupt me, let me have my speech." So, but I like the stammering community that they accept me. Stammer is the British Stammering Association. It's a massive charity who are lovely, but they know what I'm like, and they know that I'm a bit middle-aged on this subject. I'm 49. I don't do a lot of the new. I don't object to people seeing disabilities as positives, but it's not for me. I know that it's a good way to live life. But the thing is, you can work on your stammer and get better, and also accept it as a disability. And that's the weird sort of schism that we all live with, people who stammer.
I so appreciate what you're sharing, because as an observer of others, this comes up quite a bit in the podcast, people talking about different types of things that they experience in their life and that they often describe as this might be a limitation or a disability, or it also is a thing that tends to propel them forward. And you see it show up in so many different forms and in so many different ways and descriptions and so forth. So I appreciate you sharing that. And also just it's one of the things that we do on the podcast is, I'm a life coach as well. And so sometimes you might say something that I'm particularly interested in, or that might be of interest to explore with our guests. So I will jump in from time to time, but I generally tend to wait for, a cue. So it sounds like we're going to be aligned there. So nice.
Absolutely.
Sean, before we get into the 5 questions, obviously I ask every guest the same 5 questions. And before we get into that, one of the things I like to ask each guest is, as you think ahead to the conversation we're going to have the next 35, 40 minutes or so, what intention would you have for yourself in sharing your story?
Well, in the podcast universe, I love the metaphor of the comma and the I'm an English guy. I make my living from English. I obviously, talking about my stammer and the writing, English is all around me. The comma is a little part of English, all languages, of course, but there it is. It stands there as this kind of great pause in a sentence and in life. And what does that mean? And it's with COVID, with all kinds of life changes, and with the chaos that any person living and observing feels through life is paused by these commas. And so I thought it was a fascinating concept, and you seem cool, and it's that's the reason that I wanted to come on. And it's interesting to talk about the diversity of my experience, because I don't fit into boxes very easily, and I'm quite proud of that. So this seems like the kind of thing which accepts that well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate that. And yeah, that's exactly what we do here, is let you tell the story in your way and talk about your experience. And that's my intention, I guess, is to support you in your intention and sharing your story, but also that, there will be people out there who will hear your story. They'll see a little bit of themselves in your story and in you, and they'll feel a little less alone. They'll feel more connected. And then in the best of cases, they're going to feel inspired or empowered to maybe do something that they've been wanting to do. So that's my intention for our time together.
Lovely.
Sean, let's jump into the first question. So where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
Well, I think there's been a couple, as I mentioned, but the big, that doesn't help anyone, does it? The biggie, the one that comes to mind best is coming back from being in Istanbul for 10 years to 10 years ago this year in 2014. I'd been there since 2004, living there as a teacher of cultural studies and English and a musician. And these albums that I mentioned, I recorded out there. I had an amazing time, as you would for 10 years in such a city. And when I got back, I'd been warned by my stepfather that Britain's changed, you're going to see. And I know that coming back from a long period of time to your home country is a bumpy ride. And it was bumpy, and that bumpiness probably lasted a couple of years. I thought it would be, the comma pause would be like, a couple of days, but it turned out to be a couple of years of readjustment. And so that was a massive surprise to come back from being quite a big alternative artist in Istanbul, as I pretty much came to be at the end of that time. I was the biggest international sort of musician there. And then going back to Sussex County of England and having to go to my mum's spare bedroom for a couple of weeks or a couple of months while I sorted out a place to live. Just a massive cultural change. And I didn't realize what Istanbul had done to my brain, my soul, And so you go from cosmopolitanism into rural England is huge.
So there's this big shift. You were fortunate to travel, to go to another country. It sounds like you kind of discovered a big part of yourself there. You said, you had achieved this level of fame. You had done this body of work there, these recordings, these albums, and kind of become someone. And correct me, I'm reflecting. So anywhere I misreflect something, then certainly tell me. So you've kind of become someone and sort of become a big fish in this big pond over there. And then coming back home, there's this huge shift to, it's not the same. People don't know me the same way. People don't know the work that I've done. The environment's different. I mean, and so many other things that you described.
Yeah, no, that's completely it. In Istanbul, I didn't know this when I was going out there, what it was going to be. Lots of us think that Istanbul's a bunch of dust tracks and camels and things like that, right? That's the ridiculous cliche that the West has. It's not ridiculous, it's just the world being the world. And when I got there, I realized it's the second biggest city, but depending on how you count, in the world, like 20 million people or something, just massive. So there are all the people of the world there. I got sucked in quickly to the expat scene, naturally enough. And so I met loads of Americans for the first time in my life, loads of Canadians, Australia, all over Europe, all that. It was all there, all very intelligent people, often dissatisfied and exploring with their own country of what's going on. This was the height of the Iraq War. So there were loads of Americans out there sitting in pubs, getting drunk and talking about Bush. And then I would come and join them and get drunk and talk about Blair. So it was that for years. And over that time, because we're like this, I'm not really talking about just me, there's about 20 people in the music scene, also most of them teachers, lots of drinking, they get their sort of Turkish wives, they start to gather, there's a lot of that going on. I didn't go down that route. And then you sort of become this sort of cultural force, I suppose, like a scene. And we were enjoying doing all that, hand in hand with the good times of living in a city like this. So when it came to the end of this time, and the other little the other detail that it would be remiss of me not to mention is that I missed my first visa run So I spent actually the 9 months of being the 9 years of being there after the first year illegally. So most people realise that in the scene, and it was kind of mentioned. It wasn't actually a huge deal, but it did come to a huge deal when I had to leave because I was essentially deported. Not like that big a deal, but they're sort of, what's this, Mr. Parker? I'm like, sorry, I forgot. So it was, it was a bumpy ride coming out of that scene.
Well, what I think I'm hearing is that you had formed a community there, and that, is it possible that had the situation not been as it was with you needing to leave for legal reasons, that you potentially could even still be there?
I had enough by the last 2 years. So 8 years was probably enough. So by the last 2, I was starting to display signs and to feel rattled by not being on my home turf, which it's not very cool. But I started to miss not being on my own level playing field of England and doing art and music at home. So I was waiting in a way for that to come back, and I might have brought that on come the 10-year point, which is a nice handy sort of cutoff, I suppose, sort of numerically. And I actually had an argument with a neighbour. It was a drunken argument over something, and he called the police, and so the police came along, and it was like, oh right, because we were really, he was chucking shot glasses at me, and I was just getting really cross with him. It was one of those late night silly things. The Turkish police came along and they took us both off to the station, and they naturally check your passports as a foreigner, and that's when the process started. So I was like, maybe I brought that on. I don't know. It wasn't deliberate, but it happened.
Okay. Well, it sounds like it was eventful, to say the least, right? Now, so you were describing this as your comma, and you ended up returning home, and now you're kind of getting settled back in and figuring things back out again. What else would you say about this particular situation, this comma that you were sitting on?
It was a realization that, okay, Istanbul is done now. The period of being abroad is done. I'm not, I like to think of myself as a traveling type person, but the reality is that I don't have a massive thing to explore inside me like other people seem to, like the others in Istanbul did. They'd go off onto the Far East and things like that. I'm like, no, I just want to go back to Britain. It's like I'd done that chunk, and I like going somewhere to live and work, I suppose. I felt like it was done. So it's like, okay, here we are now at home, and coming back to a place which had changed in cultural politics in a massive way. Istanbul is still a patriarchal country. It's 99% Muslim. And those things we would argue about out there in the pubs. They used to celebrate being jealous. So a couple of the girlfriends that I had out there, and seeing it in other couples, they would be jealous with each other for various reasons, for boy-girl reasons. And they would celebrate that. Oh, isn't he great? He's so jealous. Then when I got back here, the whole thing, and I wasn't like that. So I would argue with them saying, that's not the way to be. And they're like, who are you to say that? I'm like, okay, that opened my mind, and I left that thinking. And it's also why I didn't commit to anybody, So then I came back into a place where jealousy is seen as something to get over, to not have, and lots of the politically correct things that we've noticed. Not that political correctness is necessarily a bad thing, particularly on a show like this, but it's so divorced from Istanbul reality, which is boy, girl, get married, but for this time being, if you're a foreigner, you can drink in the middle of the city. It's almost like a patronizing thing to foreigners. Over here, it's like you can do whatever you want, but if you do get that drunk or that crazy, you're going down a rabbit hole of your own making, and good luck with it. And there's not the same sort of the moral code going higher, the moral relativity happening in Britain. I'm not sure about America, but I get the impression from my American friends that we import loads of American cultural things in Britain. So there's an enormous bump of coming back to 2010s England, Me Too, everything happening in the media, all of those kind of energies going on. And that just kept me on this comma going, what the hell, how am I supposed to get on as an artist here after that? So that's what kept me in that place for a while.
Well, and that's gonna take us into the second question very smoothly, but I want to acknowledge something and kind of reflect back before we go into that. So what I'm hearing is, there's certainly every single person who experiences something like this can characterize it in their own unique ways, right? Because it's very personal. But what I'm definitely hearing is, you had removed yourself to another country where all of the norms are different. You spend all of this time there kind of adapting to the cultural differences, the way that people interact with each other, sort of getting to a point of being able to adopt it and or at least, live with it, make peace with it, and then become ready to, okay, now I think I'm ready to go back to something that's familiar. Now you come back and what was in your mind supposed to be familiar is now almost just as foreign as the place that you left to in the first place.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's exactly what had gone on. I'd become 10 years older. I'd achieved a lot of the things that I hadn't when I left, especially in music. So I'd got loads of those ideas out. I'd got the stuff heard. You'd done the gigs. I felt satisfied from that creative process. And then coming back to being a normal guy, not that I wasn't normal out there, but because of being a 6-foot Englishman with sort of fair hair in the middle of Istanbul, you're already not particularly normal. But then coming back to England, I'm not unusual at all. So it's that kind of change, and it's not a fall because there's nothing wrong with being normal. It's fine. It's just like, yes, you're a fish in a pond out there, and over here you're a fish in a very big pond of everybody who is doing pretty much the same thing as you. However, the culture around you tends to be changing itself, and it's putting lots of rational-minded people through a weird process anyway. So you start to sympathize with other people in your boat, which is getting towards middle-aged by then, So you find yourself in a new pond.
Yeah. Well, so let's go to the second question, because I think you're going to be able to expand on this. And then I want to jump back in again. So the second question is, as you look back at this comma that you were sitting on, what did this create for you? I feel like you've already started to describe that, but what else would you add?
It formed itself as a natural life pause, the coming back, but it created the fact that I was post-music. I mean, I'm still doing music, so let's not say post-music, but I got a lot of those original ideas I had stored up for years because it's such a heavy passion of mine, and they were out. So now it's like, well, what do we do next? And what happens next after this comma, which is basically that aeroplane coming over Europe into Gatwick, going, right, coming back now. As I say, I don't take air trips very often. I'm not that kind of a flyer. This is an unusual thing. So that had that dramatic effect. And I started to explore work ideas. I started to be a writer out there properly. So that, right, I'm going to write a book about Istanbul. That'll be a bit of a pause, kind of what's it, like a bookmark, doorstop. It's a thick old book, so it's a doorstop. So I gathered all that stuff up, and I wrote Salt in the Milk, 10 Years in Istanbul, which was my first book. So it kind of comes across like a tourist guide, but it's not. It's about music and sort of cultural observations and things like that, all mixed up together in this kind of tome of gathered up. So it's a 10 years of writing about culture and music, basically. And then each year after that, I started to publish books, half sort of self publishing through Amazon and also through hybrid publishing with publishers. So I get both of those industries going on and working out how to do it. So it helped. The comma, the pause, the aeroplane helped me step out of music and into writing, I think would be a fair way of answering that. It wasn't designed that way. That's just how it turned out to be.
So I hear that. And what I was going to say earlier too is that it seems I'm first of all, I'm fascinated. Let me say this. Part of what I'm reflecting is just what I'm hearing. And then I just have to confess, I can't help but self-reference because I'm very much exploring international travel these past couple of years and want to continue to do so in the future. And so I'm really like absorbing a lot of your story and your experience as it might relate to me. But it's not my story. I just wanted to tell you, like, if I ask a question or reflect something, there is going to be some self-referencing in there. But what I'm hearing you say, as an artist, expression is, as you've already talked about, such a big part of what art is, what it means, and why you do art, right? And so, to be in Istanbul and to be recognized for your music and your art and your expression, and then to come back and not be recognized for that expression, that is like what a lot of people would describe, if I'm a doctor and I can't practice medicine, or if I'm a plumber and now I have to work in a kitchen or whatever the case might be. Maybe the plumber isn't the best example, but anyway, I'm a baker and now I have to work in the yard. But what I'm hearing you say is you went through this period of kind of like disidentification, because everything had changed, but then it moved you in another direction. It moved you into writing, still expressing. And it sounds also, you correct me if I'm wrong, but while you were in Istanbul, your musical expression was in the moment. Back home in the UK, your written expression is reflective.
Wow. Yeah, you're good. That's exactly it. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of it in those terms until now. That's exactly what the process was. It's that what was very much that. Though I was collecting ideas and recording them there, but it was indeed in the moment. Not all happy. It was quite fraught, like because of the emotional things with other people I referenced earlier. It wasn't all great by any means. It's an amazing place, but because life isn't all great, let's not pretend it is. So when I got back here. It was looking back on that. This book was definitely doing that. When I got into the other books from thence on, it was more about keeping up with what's going on now and what is happening in culture as we go, which was like a new discipline, but it's much more with writing. I do enjoy the writing, and it's probably been my most successful commercially thing. There's getting published, it gets recognized and people quote it, and it was very important in that. But it's not the thing that gives me the most joy. I love it, don't get me wrong. It's not the thing compared to the art and the music. It's the third in terms of joy, but I still do it with equal intensity because the books, people really, really do connect apparently with how I'm putting things. So it's like I was able to unfold that new skill as I came back and was indeed looking back on that. I mean, we're looking back on it now because of this show, but I am not the existentialist to get pretentious to never talk about the past. I don't mind people who do that. I know some people who compulsively won't talk about the past because they're almost like scared of it, and I don't really ascribe to that anymore. I used to as a younger man, like just live for the now. It's healthy, but it's also important to acknowledge what's been. And, just imagine having the dementia, which hopefully we get a cure for in our lifetimes, where all that is eroded without your control. Awful. So you might as well acknowledge the 40 years that have gone before. That's how I feel anyway. I like to collect my past and curate it and and to try to understand all the odd little changes that have happened. Because I'm an artist, and that's what artists do,
Yeah. Well, and that's what artists do. And it also strikes me as someone, I'm actually a little older than you, but, it's not that life is over, but when you've had a robust life behind you, there can be enjoyment in going back and looking at it again and telling the stories. I mean, isn't that kind of what we've done as human beings, throughout time immemorial, is we live the life and then we turn around and talk about it to anybody who will listen. It's kind of what we do as humans.
That's the beautiful thing about the podcast revolution as well, right? Because the families where that would used to be happen, the oral tradition, we're just taking that into algorithmic world, and it's a beautiful thing. So I have no idea who's kind of having listened to us right now, and hello to them. And it's just wonderful that people that I don't know are going, oh, I don't like the sound of that bloke, or how interesting, and I really like Paul anyway, so that's why I'm listening. So any of those feelings are all good and beautiful, and a part of the the lost oral tradition can be overdone when you look at the good things like the podcast revolution is. I call it podcast revolution because it's such a thing over the last sort of 10 years. And I'm happy with what it's done to the legacy media. I'm not going to deny that. I think it's brilliant. And here we are on it. So, yeah.
Well, and it what you say reinforces something for me too. Like, why do I do this podcast? And every podcast has its own niche, and I've said this before, but I appreciate being able to hold space for the storytelling itself, right? Like, we don't do advice and expertise and millionaires and celebrities here, although that doesn't mean that any of those people can't participate. But here we really focus on the telling of the story, right? And it is a return to, historical traditions, and it reflects the fact that everyone's story matters, and that there's something to be learned from everyone's story, right? We as a culture, at least here in the United States, and you mentioned earlier, and it's an observation that I've made about the UK starting to adopt more and more, United States habits and norms. We can have a different conversation about that, but that we have a tendency to celebrate, well, your story's only worth telling if you're famous or if you've made $1 million or more or what have you. And it's bullshit. It's just bullshit, right? Everybody's story matters. And it doesn't mean it has to matter to everyone, but everybody's story deserves to be heard. And there is going to be somebody who's going to appreciate hearing it, right? So,
well, exactly that. Totally.
Yeah. Let's jump into the third question. So you've talked quite a bit about this experience and the comma and what it created for you. Third question, Sean, is what did you learn about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma?
That I can survive anything, I suppose. I mean, that wasn't obviously coming back to Britain after a while away wasn't the worst thing that's ever happened. But it was a major thing, which I wasn't expecting to be as major as it was. So it's like, once you've got through that, and I'd got out of my mum's house and gone on to get my own flat and things in Chichester, I started to put myself back together gradually, and then to reform in a creative way, and to go, well, what do I do now? And I did actually do another album. It's not like I gave up on all that, but much sort of less of the live performance and a bit more of the studio, that kind of thing. So I sort of discovered that I was getting older, and England had changed in its own way, and now I had to get those two things together and be mature about the fact that those years in Istanbul are now over, and what to do now. So just a realization of where I am, and also reflecting on culture in the middle of last decade. Don't forget, it was a mental 2015-16 was a mental time with our Brexit and your Trump, and everything that happened out of the ripples of that. I'm not talking about good or bad, just major. And those are two major things, and we're feeling it now. And that was important to reflect on. And then I put it through the prism of Istanbul as well. So I was able to flesh out the experience. Lucky for me, I know not everyone's able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and you call attention to the fact that, the events are really just the triggers, that they're revealing and showing us things that have already very much been in place and have been incubating or marinating or whatever creative word we want to use, right? And that these events reveal so much about ourselves and our context and our circumstances. And that's what it did, certainly in the UK and in the United States during that time, and has continued to help us see and evaluate ourselves, right, as a people. Coming back to you, like going through that sounds like difficult period, challenging.
Mm.
What would you say it revealed the most to you? You said, I can survive anything, and you keep coming back to this theme of the cultural changes. What would you say it revealed the most about you in this learning?
I think because a part of the motivation for going out there in the first place was to live in a Islamic country, due to a lot of the stories in the media are all about Islam bad around the Iraq wartime after 9/11. It was just, I don't know if you remember, but just an absolute bombardment for 4 years of like terror stories, and there's going to be a bomb in every bin. And I was already going, I'm not sure about this. This is what my thesis was about at uni. It's like the media. I've got a big problem with the media, basically. Or I'm just a critical thinker about it. And so when I got back, I understood that I can live in a place like that and see the people for what they are, which is not the threat that they have been painted out to be. So I'd proved to myself that, almost with a journalistic eye, I suppose, what's actually going on compared to how the media tells you stuff. Since then, and since 2016 and the fake news thing, which we have all started to realize there's something wrong in the media, whether you like Trump or not. Every thinking person that I know has gone, there's something wrong with the media. And I think I was realizing that slightly before, and now I've gone, yep, it was. And and there are problems with the clash of civilizations with fundamentalist Islam and Christianity. Not to be too grand about anything, there are issues that we really got to deal with, and immigration and things like that. But it's also groups of people are much, you cannot ascribe the broad brush to any of it. And I think the best thing that I learned about myself was I was able to see through that, to live with them, and to come out and go, you can do it, and you can come back to normality, in inverted commas, here, having understood that, and because the thing is, though, I know a lot of people aren't able to do that. So I'm very privileged with the British passport, and I do recognize that. And I always keep that in mind,
Just a huge acknowledgement to you, because I heard so many things in what you shared just in this part of the story. Is, first of all, the critical thinking, right? That's so important. Not just believing what you're told, being willing to go out in pursuit of your own answers, kind of the trust but verify. But honestly, it didn't even sound like it was just that it was trust but verify. It was, you described having a knowing something didn't seem right about what you were being told, the prevailing messaging about groups of people, and in this case, specifically Muslim. And growing up in the United States, obviously, we had that stuff going on here too. What I really appreciate is, no, I'm going to go out and find out on my own, because I don't believe this to be true. And I'm willing to put myself out there and learn whatever it is I learn. And you learned a completely different narrative.
Yeah. It's another really good reading. Like at the start of it in 2004, I had a lot of Turkish friends in England who I wanted to go and see, who I missed, combined with observing Blair, Bush, but particularly Blair, to be honest, obviously, and what they were doing and how they were doing it, and basically getting sick of here, because I'd voted for him in 1997, but by almost every young person had at that time. And so 7 years later, by the time he was in for a second time, and he's basically turning into tyrant, sort of going, what, why? And I was just at a very delicate age of 29 of must go and do something in the world, which turned out to be that. And also combined with not happy with Britain's behavior right now. And also, I love these Turkish people. So I put all those together. As I hardly ever do things for one reason, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And there was the two reasons that I went out there, or even three, of like being sick of Britain, meeting all these lovely Turkish people, and having some postgraduate depression, I think, which I wanted to shake by doing that.
And so much came out of it. Opportunity to form a community, opportunity to express yourself, opportunity to learn and challenge the narrative. You said earlier something, you said it very casually, but you were talking about, coming back home to normal. And the thing that popped out in my mind was, yeah, but you kind of proved that what's normal to begin with, right? Like what really is normal. And I see that in a positive way, right? Like challenge all of the things that are considered to be normal.
Well, indeed. I mean, I suppose with the normal, I just meant the familiar with because you know how your own culture works, you know what it requires, you know what's wrong with it, and you're the only one that's allowed to criticize it. It's a bit of a truism, but there's something there. It's what I mean by that is if I was in Turkey and I start to criticize Turkey, people would get funny with me. But they could. But if I'm here in Britain and I criticize Britain, no one's going to get funny with you because they're like, well, you're British, you're allowed to do that. It's a similar thing with America because of our wonderful special relationship. Our cross communications are really, really good. But it's like if you got angry with a friend of yours, you might have a very different argument with him or her than you would with me, because there's that certain, even though we're speaking the same language, there's that certain off-pistedness where you just don't go to that argument. There's no point because the person doesn't have the same exact frame of reference, and only if they do can you have a meaningful argument with them.
and there's this element of tribeness, belongingness, right? Like the whole, like I can say whatever I want about my brother, but you can't, right? So
right, exactly. Yeah.
I just have to acknowledge, because I was fortunate to be able to take a trip to Cairo a couple of years ago. And it was very similar. I went because obviously I was fascinated. I wanted to see the history and the pyramids and so forth. But like you, I also wanted to go someplace where I was in a different culture. It was not built around me, my needs, my beliefs, my comfort, and to see what it was like to be there and to experience the discomfort of being in a place that was very different, and staying in a place of observing, noticing, and it not being any of my business. And it was a wonderful trip. It was a wonderful trip. There was so much to be learned by looking around me every day and saying, well, gosh, this isn't like home. And then being able to challenge that notion in my head that says, well, it ought to be this or it ought to be that, and say, no, this works very well for them, always has for thousands and thousands of years. And that's none of my business. I was never thought of, when in the design of this culture, nor should I have been. So there's so much to be gained from putting ourselves out there and confirming, our own beliefs, like you said.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the difficulty with the imperial eye, isn't it? And, our history in Britain of this sort of, oh, we shouldn't be doing that. And then the American imperialism of the last 100 years, the unofficial, and it's which, let's not forget, the world loves. So everyone forgets the fact that the world loves American imperialism, and everyone has a go at the same time. That's the nature of great power, isn't it? But then you kind of have the problem is that they're really, really appreciative of us, when you go out there. But the minute you criticize it in that way, everyone gets really defensive. So the whole thing is not as openly honest, and it almost can't be. And it also reminds you of let me say, the problems of globalism, because, there's this idea of pulling everything together and everything else. And well, apparently there are some issues with that, which we're going to see more and more and more of. And if it actually gets anywhere, so you kind of think all those things through in as positive a way as you can, as opposed to they're all shithole countries or whatever way you might want to do it. It's not the case, and it never has been.
I too had an experience more than one occasion where I might have been talking to an international friend or colleague and became critical of my own country or my own living circumstances or what have you, and was challenged many times. It's like not because I was talking bad about it, but because it was pointed out that it's like even with y'all's problems, my problems, they're still, you know, way less worse than what other people are dealing with. So anyway, it's interesting. It's just an interesting dynamic that you've described. So
yeah, well, it's with all of our benefits and our education and the direction our educations have taken. Putting that up again, it was very helpful to be English teaching out there too, and cultural studies teaching even more. We'd have these chats in advanced English and trying to explore and to never, because for example, Paul, they wouldn't be as critical of Hitler as you and I might be. I don't want to go there on our podcast, but they wouldn't be. And I was absolutely astonished by that, because we are trained to think of him as the ultimate evil of the modern world, right? Fair enough. But to them, it's not the case at all. And it's like, wow, the rest of the world, here we go. So that was a very big education for me, just for one easy example.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like just to learn from that, like it's one thing to have the emotional reaction to it. It's another thing to be curious, like, well, why is it, tell me more. How is it that y'all came to that belief? Why is your belief different than ours? What are the differences? Right. Like that's what I'm hearing a lot of what it sounds like your experience was over there.
Yeah. And then your anti-Semitism comes up in class, and because I'm off-piste with that, I don't know what to do with it, because it's just not really wasn't at that time a part of my world. It's like, right, okay, these are prejudices, and I don't really, so I would just change the subject as one does in England and go on to something else, It's just because it's too much. You can't dismantle 2,000 years of the Jewish and Islamic sort of tension in a classroom in front of you when they have all their stuff embedded. All we can do is do the English words for it, So
it's interesting too, right? Because I think, and then we'll go to this next question, and also proximity, right? Now I'm inserting myself into this, just my kind of thoughts, my opinion, but who are we to be the ones to even facilitate that conversation when we're not even close in proximity? And yet there's all this history there and thousands of years of being parts of these conversations. And who are we to come in and then suddenly be the ones to facilitate the dialogue, right?
Well, that's the imperial mind again, and which person does like the pale finger drawing the line in the sand? Nobody likes it. So that was a very, very educational process for me at that time. That was long before the comma, but it was probably one of the points before the comma started. So.
Yeah, but it also it seems to reinforce your point, right? Which is, this goes into the mix of all the things that you've described that made it very disorienting to come back home, and not only to be back home and it's a different environment, but now so many things have changed and you've changed.
Yeah.
Which then brings us to the fourth question, which is, what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this comma?
Well, as I jumped off it in sort of as I got my place there in Chichester, the year afterwards, in 2016, I started an arts venue on the Sussex coast here, which I ran for a year, and it appeared to be a good way of pulling together all my interest into a place and a job and an art project at the same time. It was a proper venue, and I got investors around me and a sort of team. It was really exciting. It was really good, but we had some legal problems throughout the year, and eventually it closed down because of partly because I took on too much responsibility, and not being an economically minded person particularly. It went a bit. The business part just went a bit wrong, and we were drinking the profits as well, which doesn't help. So all those things happened as a result of trying to integrate myself back into Britain, but not sort of giving away any of that artistic capital that I felt I built up, and I still feel I've built up. I'm very proud of that was a mixed success. It was a success in some ways, and it was a failure in other ways in terms of it went out of business because of pressure from the council. But I'd learnt from the Istanbul Times as to follow what you're doing, because eventually the following of things is going to be better, even the pain you go through at the time, than not doing it. So I think it's probably that, and sticking to things for quite some time. I think is a good quality, and it's not very common anymore. I'm noticing it's not so common anymore to stick at things for ages, until you've got something really juicy out of it. And so that's my best advice to myself, is to keep going. It's going to be all right in the end.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're right. There's things are shifting. Schools of thought are shifting. People's perseverance might seem to be shifting. And I think, we're going through this period of people are reevaluating, what's in it for me if I stick with it. But what I believe I'm hearing you say is there's like this core element of what I'm sticking with, and yet you're allowed to experiment. But at the end of the day, being able to ask yourself, and what is it that ultimately is moving me forward? What is it that ultimately keeps me going to the next step? Even if, okay, the studio didn't work out on this hand, and maybe there were legal issues on that hand, but at the end of the day, those things are almost just like costumes on the path, but the path keeps going. That's what I believe I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. No, I think that is very much what it is. These things are all part of, I suppose, a chaptered life. And then you only start to realize that once you have a look back on it and go, look, chapter there. And because there's a whole art school sort of period before all this, which we haven't talked about, and the period afterwards, which has been the last few years, which has been its own kind of crazy with COVID and everything else. So it's like, but that part of the transition is what I think is pertinent to what we mean here. Trying to track my way back to your question.
Well, the original question was what has changed for you as a result of sitting on this comma, and you talked a little bit about that. You had at one point started the artist venue, and then you said after about a year that didn't quite work out, and then the message to yourself was keep going. You dropped in the message, even if it's painful.
Yeah.
What else has changed for you? Kind of looking at where you sit today, how would you say that comma has changed you?
I think the fact of it was almost a comma full stop at the end. It's a punctuation mark at the end of a bunch of chapters, and to then go, I see there's been chapters, and you hadn't realised that before, and it's kind of gathered itself up into what Dr. Michael Norton of University of Bristol, was a good friend of mine, sort of calls it's the artistic life, it's the artistic view, the sociological artistic life. So you've understood about what you've done, and as opposed to sort of saying, all the mistakes I made, or I can't believe what I did, you say, well, actually, they're conceptualized as part of a life, and it will be of interest to somebody at some point. And being the recording kind of guy I am, in one way, in one sort of medium or another, and this is another we're doing right now, it gets recorded in some way or other and segmented into health, because I don't think anybody wants to be deported, which is essentially, an aspect of what happened with the comma. But it's like, you can say, well, that deportation was its own process of itself. And I was able to sit in the Foreigners Office of Istanbul amongst fighters going to fight in the Syrian war, who were sitting on bunk beds with their tops off, staring at me, eating my rice as I'm about to be put on an aeroplane. It's surreal, absolutely surreal, and that was another part of that transition, and going, I'm leaving Istanbul when I'm surrounded by Syrian freedom fighters singing Allah Akbar over their evening meal. And this couldn't be more surreal. So it just had that feeling of like, zoom, and then everything afterwards that we've mentioning since has been post.
So you're saying that was almost like a defining moment that nothing else has been able to compare to.
Well, there are other things all throughout life, but it's the one thing from the last 10 or so years, which it has been a life changer. I mean, it's another poddy really, but in 1997, I lost my father when I was 22, which is very young. And it had a massively huge effect on my life, and it brought on panic attacks, which then spurred me on to get over that and not go to. It was awful. I was mentally ill from panic attacks for like a couple of years. I'm sure I was, and after that, it was like I'm never going to be that bad again, and that spurred on loads and loads of creative. Let's get somewhere work. I went to art school for 6 years, got my master's. And then Istanbul, all these different things came after Dad dying. So that was actually an earlier comma, put it that way.
But I hear that. I mean, you said I'm never going to let it be that bad again. And it seems like that's a thread that pulls through this whole story. Even if we haven't heard parts of the original story or other chapters, that seems like that thread is coming through here in terms of kind of how you take charge of your situations, your circumstances, your opportunities.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I've read before that if a male, particularly male, for some reason does lose his father as a young boy, they're very, very keen and active in trying to get things done. I didn't know this at the time that I was starting to whir into overdrive around the millennium, but only in retrospect, on looking back on Istanbul and things, did I realize that that's what I appeared to be doing. I'm always hesitant to ascribe things to specific reasons, but it was definitely contributory. And I'm going to prove Dad right from behind, from the grave. It's that kind of a subconscious thinking, and it's entirely subconscious because we had totally different paths. He was a university lecturer, and I'm doing all this artsy stuff. But it's also like, I'm going to do this for you, Dad, kind of thing, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, you did teach while you were in Istanbul.
True, I did. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I so appreciate you talking about how, it being sort of subconscious, like it does, even more than when we're not aware of it. It's there. It's kind of vibrating under the radar, right?
Yeah.
Well, and like you said, that could be its own episode. We could talk so much more about that. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to explore that further, although I'd love to. I'd love to bring us back to the fifth question. And that is, what does getting off the comma look like for you?
Yeah. So that we talked about the arts for venue there, and that was very much a post comma, and because the fallout from that was a couple of years. I mean, it was a loss of confidence, okay, but also I don't know. I don't lose confidence because I look at things critically and go, what actually went wrong? I wasn't hurt by it. It was just like, wow, okay, now I know what to do, and that's not to take on entire responsibility of a place myself. That was my education from that. Also, to not to drink the profit so much, which was like a hangover from Istanbul. There was lots of boozing in Istanbul, and I think that boozing did continue at the venue. So after that, it was like, right, there'll be no more of that kind of thing. And I didn't miss the hangovers, right? So it's like crack on with normal life. So that was by 2017, 18, and then then the COVID kind of came along, and I was doing some lecturing on stammering and creativity. I'd given a TED talk in Istanbul called Stammering and Creativity, which gave itself to the name of the book that the compelling speech book in 2023. That was like the written version of the TED talk. So I was giving these talks in various universities around Britain. So that was my thing. And then that was obviously stopped by COVID and everything else. And everybody's at home and everybody and that's its own international comma, isn't it? I suppose stop getting that metaphor is naughty, but it's such fun. And it's like, so that's what COVID meant. And the last sort of 4 years, it's just been everybody getting back to normal. I've been writing like crazy and doing loads of art like crazy since. So it's a slow build out of the original Istanbul bump. But that doesn't mean that everything that's happened in the last to 10 years has been irrelevant. It's all been absolutely relevant as anything in Istanbul. It's just a slightly less exotic sheen to it.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate so much about you saying it's a slow build out, right? Especially, if the thing that we're leaving was dramatic or grand or sensational. Sometimes when people are talking about sitting on a comma, they're talking about a problem or a challenge or a difficulty or a situation. And the same labels apply, right? Like whatever it was that you're moving away from or moving up out of, if it was big, then the build out can be slow. So I so appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I hear that writing about it, composing about it, creating about it, expressing it is a very important way for you to get off the comma.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help that, and I don't know how it happens and why. And it comes to me in the middle of the night and in the shower and walking around the park. I get ideas, tunes, little phrases. So I carry around a notebook and I scribble them down. But I'm also quite a systematic person. I'm not a kind of chaotic artist type. I'm a systematic artist. So I got my notebook and I make sure that the emails are done. The jobs of life, the bills are paid, and then I will crack on with the painting. So at least I try to structure myself in order that I don't go too chaotic, basically, because I like to be efficient, basically.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, expressive and organized, it sounds like.
Well, try to. It doesn't always work.
Isn't that true for all of us, right? For all kinds of situations. Sean, I so appreciate you sharing your story with us and for opening up and being honest. And I guess, as you look back at the conversation we've had, at the story you've told over the past 40, 45 minutes or so, what would you acknowledge yourself for quickly before we wrap things up?
I suppose that anything that happens to you is entirely dependent on how you frame it, and not entirely, a lot dependent on how you frame it. If you can see the good in whatever has happened, and there is, despite the headlines, and also if you can see the bad in something that everyone else says is good, then you started to see the whole picture. And so yeah, to not ignore your past entirely, but to not live in it either, I guess.
Okay. All right, Sean, as we wrap up, tell us where can people find you if they want to contact you, look you up, see what kinds of things you're working on. We'll put all these links in the show notes, obviously. So kind of talk us through where can people find you?
Righto. Yes, I'm very busy on Elon's X. I find it a very smooth and open-minded place. So if they can come to Sean B.W. Parker. That's my artist name. The BW is Benjamin William. It's my full name. So that's on X, and almost all of the sites on Amazon. They can get my 9 books from Sean B.W. Parker on there. I have a Spotify page. They can hear 40 of my songs on there, which are all the albums. I'm all over online if they want to find me there in one way or another.
One last thing that we'll do before we close, that I do with every guest, and I believe it's an important part of what we're doing here, because obviously you being here telling your story is all about sharing stories and kind of lifting each other up. And this is your opportunity to look within your circle and lift up others who are important to you. So we call this acknowledgements, and it's your chance to think about folks or think about who matters to you. And that can be causes, organizations, creators, people in your life, or what have you. Give them a voice, boost them, lift them up a little bit. So as you look at the folks in your circle, who would you like to acknowledge? And we'll put their information in the show notes as well.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. And particularly over the last couple of years, post-COVID, I just mentioned him a little bit earlier, to Dr. Michael Norton of the University of Bristol. He runs the Empowering the Innocent organization. He's a specialist on miscarriages of justice, which is another passion of mine. And so if people go to Empowering the Innocent, they can read his articles and mine on that site there. He's a powerhouse of this sort of subject, and a good pal as well. Baroness Claire Fox is the organizer of Academy of Ideas. She's in the House of Lords, as you can see by her name, and she's a free speech champion, an independent-minded woman, and an absolute political dynamo as well. Very helpful lady too. Very, very, very soulful and cool. So Baroness Claire Fox, to shout out to her and the Academy of Ideas, who are just super objective organisation. And one more, Joanna Williams is a writer for the Times, Spectator, the Daily Mail, things like that, and she's also the founder of CIEO think tank, and she's an excellent another objective type of writer who doesn't go with all the progress of society if it doesn't make sense to her, and she puts it in a very, very, very cool way. She's a very lovely lady, and she's published a couple of my articles last year as well. She's always very supportive of my work. Did wonderful couple of reviews of Compelling Speech, and this year's book, A Delicate Balance of Reason, which I published 6 months ago. So shout out to Joanna as well.
All right, nice. Sean, thank you so much. So much that you've shared with us, so much for folks to be able to connect with and that will resonate with folks, and just, for sharing your story as it mattered to you. So I always so appreciate you being here. And I wish you a great week ahead and look forward to having more conversations with you as well.
I feel like I've had the greatest therapy session in the world. Thank you so much, Paul. It's been really good fun.
Thank you. Nice. What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma. And feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.